I did see somebody ask the question, what about the rest of us? Well, we got to set up infrastructure first. You have to set up models. I think there's really important things that we do. We have set up infrastructure. We set up access. We have to provide access. We have to then set clear expectations, and then from there, opportunities. So that's access, infrastructure, expectations, and opportunities. That's what Flagship's about. And as we set that up, just talking about earlier, somebody raised the question about testing and assessment. It's very, very difficult throughout the Flagship program to actually test folks. It's a very complicated process. And we have a whole array of tests. We're using ACTFL. We're using some other exams that we've invested in. We're also now giving many of our graduates the DLFT, which is called the Defense Language Proficiency Test. And some of them are actually also getting the Foreign Service exam. So we're Foreign Service Institute exam. So we're actually looking at various ways of testing. Some of the universities, of course, give their own tests. Everything is about infrastructure, but as Sam would tell you, just getting that process in place to test students who are all over the place at different times is a very complicated process. So setting up the infrastructure is important. When I was at Title VI, working there, we had mandated through our grants to the Title VI centers that they shall assess, but we gave no guidance and no funding for it. So infrastructure is important, guidance is important, leadership is important. And I could go on, but I think I'll wait and hear from Clay.
All right. Well, I'm Clay, and I want to thank everyone for being here today. It's certainly inspiring to me after a couple of months to see all the different voices and people who are part of this conversation and this community of practice and how we can work together toward a common goal that I know each of us shares. And that certainly, for me, is the mission that I am trying to carry out every day, to encourage, to promote, to enhance, to develop international and world language education at the elementary, secondary, and post-secondary levels and beyond. That is an enormous mission, and we are trying to figure out how we can be as effective as possible, and that's why I've really enjoyed learning today and look forward to working together not only with my colleagues in government, but with the field, which really has come up with so many of the good ideas to date and will continue to give us the good ideas into the future. There are a couple of just starting frames that I wanted to emphasize. They've all been said today. But the first is that the United States is in many ways already a leader in being a multilingual and multicultural nation. And the challenge really is how we incorporate that, how we leverage that within our formal educational system. I believe, as a starting point, that we have to value our language, heritage language speaking community. We have to leverage that resource, and we have to leverage the incredible resource of what states are already doing. Over the last couple of months, I've had the chance to work with states and local communities, and I've seen what is happening in Delaware. I've seen what's happening in various communities across the country, and it's incredibly inspiring when you go and you talk to a young 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, and they're speaking to you in an inner city environment in Mandarin. We need more people to see what is happening at the grassroots level. And fundamentally, when we are asked, what is the role of the federal government, I believe, apart from all of the different things which I'll go into, it is to be a voice for what individuals are already doing, to raise a flashlight toward those incredible examples and to say to the country, to challenge the country and everyone else, look what's happening, we all should be trying to do that. So what would be helpful to us, and again, this has been mentioned a couple of times today, are data and targets. Data. What is it succinctly that we can say about the premium? Someone talked about the language premium for speakers of English in other countries. What is the language premium for our citizens who speak another language? What is it? What are a few other salient statistics and data points that we should be collecting on? And we will start collecting them, and we will incorporate them, and we will broadcast them, and we will get the word out. And the second piece is targets. We have the capacity, I believe, to stand up and say where we want the country to go on this issue. This is something that the president cares about, that the secretary cares about. We know that. We know the president who studied abroad as a child. We know the secretary who's been extremely supportive. And we know, because I'm personally committed, we just need to know what the national vision should be. And that comes back to you as a community. Is it useful to talk about the number of states who have immersion programs? Is it useful to talk about the number of students in foreign language? Is it useful to talk about certain proficiency levels? Is it useful to talk about the percentage of colleges that have students in study abroad or some other measure of internationalization? We have to set a vision, and that's something that we're very much ready to try to do. But we need input, and I hope that everyone will email all of us, but certainly email me. I'm at clay.pel@ed.gov, and I will be able to access that until midnight tonight. But they will be there when we all come back, having big thoughts about where we're going as a country. Because I mean that very seriously. We have, I believe, over the next 3.5 years, the chance to set forth the national vision. And I have every expectation that we're going to be able to make real progress on it, hopefully with the Congress, but even without the Congress. Now, just to specifically answer a couple of the questions that were brought up, what is the role of the federal government, and what is the role of the Department of Education? When I think about what we do, I think of us as having 3 basic levers in federal policy. 1 is legislation and regulation, 2 is the budget, and 3 is the bully pulpit. And we're trying to move forward on each of these. In the President's FY14 budget, we see the programs that I oversee growing modestly, but it's a growth in the right direction. It's a trend that we expect to continue over the coming years. 2, we're trying to make the federal resources that we have, make sure that they actually get to the places they need to go. So, for example, we fund 126 national resource centers, 15 language resource centers. All of them do a superb job at developing the expertise in language and area studies across the country. Many of you are from those institutions, and we look forward to continuing to strengthen them. But something which we have to do a better job of, frankly, is making sure that what is created at those institutions gets into the pipeline in a usable way. That all of these institutions are working together, not as 126 national resource centers, but one national resource center, so that we can, given the budget and the assets we have, work at the scale that we believe that those assets can work at. Secondly, and this is something that Mike and his team have worked very hard on as well, evaluation and assessment, working towards a standard of probably the interagency language roundtable scale that everyone's so familiar with, so that students know exactly where they stand. This is critical not only for the students to be able to apply to the Department of Defense or Department of State and say, I'm a 3 or I'm a 4, give me a job, but also so we can compare programs themselves, and for the students to be able to know where they stand. It's incredibly empowering to know that you're a 3. Third, we're trying to expand the inclusion. As limited as our programs sometimes may feel, we are very cognizant of the fact that we have to reach diverse students and diverse institutions. I was really happy to see community colleges represented as part of the conversation today, and both students with financial need as well as students from populations that might not have otherwise had these opportunities is incredibly important to reach. We know, all of us, because we're in this enterprise, committed to this enterprise, the power that learning another language can have, how it's transformed each of our lives. It is, certainly for me, it was the most transformative experience of my life. Those are the experiences that we have to get to the students most in need to not only learn another language, but to use language learning as a mechanism towards closing the achievement gap and moving the country forward across the board. I just want to mention one final point. In a couple of weeks, I'm headed at the invitation of the University of Minnesota to Minneapolis. And it's a meeting I'm really looking forward to because they've convened the presidents of the university, they've convened mayors, they've convened parents, students, and each element of the articulated pipeline that in many cases exists, but in many cases does not exist, around a single table. That conversation is extremely rare. It's a conversation with Mike and the Department of Defense have shown great leadership in pulling together around the Language Roadmap Initiative, but it's something that should happen in every single state. And that is certainly something that I'm personally extremely committed toward helping to make happen, to go, to be part of, to support in any way that I can. It doesn't necessarily require money or a lot of money. It requires the investment of stakeholders, many of which we're already investing in, to stand up and say, we are not in this alone. If we build up the pipeline together, there will be more for everyone across the board. And I really think that is the model for the next couple of years. The model that we're trying to take at the Department of Education, a big tent model. What else is the US government doing? What are state and local governments doing? We don't have all the answers. We don't have all the resources, but we have a voice. And it's a voice that we intend to use and to use strongly. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to second that really quickly and say that, you know, when Bob asked, what do we do next? What's the next model? You know, we talk a lot about public-private partnerships, and we kind of throw that word around. It's a very complicated process, but I think what we need to look for is more in a what we call a cross-sector collaboration. And if you do some research on that, it is really what we're trying to do in this room. The challenge is trying to find common ground. I think that pyramid that Dick gave us in that white paper is an area where I think almost everyone in this room can agree on, and that is if that can be our common ground, the idea then is how do we work together with all the various interest groups in here. Even within one agency there are different interest groups, but we need to find some common ground and work together. And I think somebody else said earlier from the ground up, but also from the top down. So I think it's important that we do find out and define very clearly what those common goals are. And I think if the white paper, you want my input right now, is define that very clearly and agree upon that. If we can leave this room with some agreement on common ground, we've made a lot of headway. And that kind of leads up from what you said.
Thanks, Mike. I think I turned on you. I want to pose one question both to the panelists and the group, sort of two parts, and then I want to open it up for questions before we end the panel. Organization is really important. Leadership is really critical. In my experience working on the federal side, on the language issue for almost 3 decades now, the leadership and coordination on both sides has been weak and ineffective, or even during good times. But coordination, so the question, the panelists, first part, is how does the government organize itself better to move ahead with one, the government will never move with one voice, God help us, but with a consensus voice. The last exercise I went through, which was an incredibly successful and rewarding effort, was the National Security and Language Initiative. We had enormous support within the Department of Defense, within the intelligence community, and within the Department of State. But we all showed up at the meeting and decided that the Department of Education would play the lead until the department told us they had no interest in taking the lead. So the voice came from the foreign affairs and defense establishment somewhat uncomfortably. running the show for a program. And incidentally, what emerged from Nestle was some very robust programs in higher ed. One or two programs in K through 12, but the major effort that was put on the table on K through 12 was never implemented because that was the Department of Ed role. So I'm just putting out on the table, how do we organize ourselves in the government better so we do a better job of not only speaking to the education community. I'm not in the government anymore, so I can't speak as me, and speaking to Congress. Second issue is how does the education community organize itself to represent itself back to the federal government? I can't tell you how many times when I was in the government, I would get a call from somebody on Capitol Hill wanting to put together a hearing and looking for names, and I'd put out some names or organizations, and they'd say, oh, please. They're going to all walk in, and one's going to say this, and one's going to say that, and they're going to say, that's a bad idea, and that's a bad idea, and they're going to cancel each other out. And by the time my members are done listening to the education community, they say, I don't want to have anything to do with this because I'm not hearing anything that's unified from the education community. So I think there's another question that has to come that's related to the white paper about moving ahead if we're looking at a role of the federal government. How does the education community organize itself to come up with a set or a strategic plan and a set of programs that make sense that can then be articulated with hopefully one voice, but at least with voices in harmony back to the federal government? So let me ask the panelists about any thoughts you have on the federal side.
Well, I think to start with, it's not clear to me that the federal government as a whole, to be candid, is that interested in language.
That's good. Good start.
And you see that in what happened to the National Security Language Initiative.
Yeah.
And as you all appreciate, classically, the agency that speaks for the president to translate presidential desires into programmatic action is OMB. And I fear in this issue, OMB sees only a bill that it doesn't want to pay, as opposed to an opportunity for the United States to succeed at a much higher level than otherwise be the case. Let's take an immediate problem the administration faces. It wants to negotiate a Trans-Pacific Partnership deal, and it wants to get it done this year. That would be a minor miracle, I might add. I have to believe if we had more negotiators who could speak and understand the commercial situation in the partner countries, we might not get to a deal, but we improve our odds substantially. But I don't hear anyone saying, where is the person who speaks Malay fluently in commercial terms to understand what the provisions mean and what the Malaysians' agenda really is in these negotiations? I think we're handicapped throughout by being late to need, too dependent on technical intelligence to tell us what the other party wants, and not good enough using cultural intelligence. As minor examples, we all have seen the last week, a hilarious example, we can't even agree how to translate to English what the new Iranian president said in an interview. When the interview is on the record, we have a tape of that. I would at least raise the possibility, if OMB doesn't want to act, whether someone like Clay can promote the notion of a federal language officer or really an orchestra conductor to try to see the degree to which, where there is interest in cabinet agencies, because it becomes a cabinet agency problem, I think, how you bring that together. In science, we have the president's science advisor, for example. For programs, we have OMB. On language, there is a major void, and I think we need to fill that void with someone who can bring the agency efforts together and figure out which agencies really want to play, which agencies want to set high standards for their future employees and set that signal now, and which agencies really don't care, and there's a limit to how long you push on the string.
Other comments?
Sure. Just as a practical first step, this is something that Mike and I have talked about together with our other language authorities and supervisors.
You heard it here first, right? Right.
We are actually planning to get together shortly to work through some of these very issues. So it's something which I think has enormous promise for all of us. At the same time, I think we have to be somewhat realistic about what everyone will do, how organized, or when we all have different sources of legislation and funding, all these different prongs can be. So we're going to try our best. But the larger point I would make is that some of the innovations that have occurred really have been because people are out there and experimenting a little bit. And the challenge for us will be how to work together so we all know what's happening without clamping down on some of the innovations, which, for example, at the Department of Defense, I think have been really great. So we're working on that, and we'll, at the working group level, be able to come up with something. I think strategically, you know, the vision would be at the bully pulpit level, how can we work together, agency to agency to agency, to have one coherent national message on these issues. That will be, I'm sure, something that we'll be working on. And then programmatically, how does everything align? We'll have to figure it out. But the other, yeah, no, Mike.
I'll just say one thing. I'll say this, that we're in an environment where if you like language programs that are supported by the federal government, it's probably a good idea to support them. This is what we have, and we're going to try to collaborate more on how we work forward. We look forward in these kinds of venues as a great opportunity for us to work with you. My question to the next panel, I'm going to pass that forward to Dick and Amy, is what do you want out of this meeting other than just another conference? And I know I'm just putting that there, right? But it's important for us to see that kind of leadership. The leadership has to come from you folks too. And so we are ready to partner any way we can, especially if we can find some common ground that we all agree on.
Okay, can we take questions? In our last, we can have time for a few questions. Maria. Well, I don't either. I don't either. Now you do.
Okay, thanks. The question, actually, and a comment to Chris. First of all, having
Chris isn't here, but go ahead and ask.
I promised I wouldn't
presenting
answer for it.
Congressman
Yeah,
Rush Holt. Having observed the congressman over the years and while I was downtown, really do a magnificent job, very eloquent job to really be an advocate for the language community. I just want to say thank you and relay that back on behalf of the language community, because he truly was and has been a lone wolf, you know, a lone voice in the desert, but he keeps tilting at those windmills, and hooray for that. But to go back to something that Dr. Chu said, and based on some of the other comments, is the answer really taking things to Congress and the government? Is the answer in the government at all? I think that we can make some incremental changes over time here and there, but if we really want to make revolutionary changes, we really need to get the people whose pockets are going to get hit really hard, because we don't have people that have the foreign language proficiency needed to negotiate, whether it's a business deal, whether it's foreign relations, the economy. It has to, and I know people don't like to hear that because it's crude to tie it to money, because all of us believe very strongly in the value of language beyond money. But if we want to get somebody's attention, we need to tie it to some dollars and how it's going to hurt us and sink us even more down and down and down the spiral as other countries like China are taking over.
So, Maria, you're asking maybe the government's not, we shouldn't bother with the government.
I think we should bother, but they shouldn't be our focus.
Okay. Okay. Any
If I
responses?
Just, second what he has to say, I'm not sure the federal government has a large financial role to play. I think it has a very important role to play, as Mike indicated, in providing seed money for innovation, because that's a public good. No one state's going to be that interested in investing in that sort of thing. But my experience at the federal level in working on a particular issue with those who really controlled it, which is the lifestyle military families can enjoy, was the key was getting the governors engaged. And I was impressed. If you had back, as you suggest, ma'am, a powerful argument why it's in their interest, the degree to which the governors would respond. And so just take one small example. Merely by persuasion, we got most states in the United States to allow military children in-state tuition rates. Now, that's against the usual pocketbook instincts of the governors. Some of this was just shame because we had some governors willing to do it, and you point to them and say, she's willing to do it, why can't you do it in your state? As State Report, Virginia was one of the last to convert, but helped by Florida's positive example. So my own instinct is on this issue, the part of the government to work with is the governor's set.
I think it's a great idea.
And that, as you suggest, what has to be arranged for them is the arguments why this pays off for your citizens, for your state. Why? Right, and they are the approach vector, partly because they do control, in most states, a significant fraction of K through 12 educational monies. And they can make a difference in how those monies are employed. Ohio's an example, back to the roadmap issue. Ohio understood or believed that its ability to revive parts of its manufacturing sector depended on business with China. Committed as a state, quite apart from any kind of federal encouragement, to trying to get K through 12 Chinese programs started. Now, where it's gone, I have not followed, but it's an example, I think, of the kind of action that can occur.
Bill.
So I just want to follow up a little bit on what Dr. Chu's response to Maria's question. And I think there's there are a couple other roles that matter from the federal perspective. We all understand that the funding amounts historically are a drop in the bucket for American education, K through 20. But we have there's a policy tone set, in particular by the Department of Education, because with, forgive me, Mike and David, what you guys do is wonderful, but often seen as somewhat self-interested. The Department of Defense is doing this for its own particular ends. And that
precisely.
But there's a policy role to be played, and then that seed money is vitally important. One of the things I think was eluded in the K-12 panel today, we do immersion, two-way immersion, fantastically well because of 20 years of investment from the Foreign Language Assistance Program. So even though that's a small amount of money, and even though the GAO said that it didn't have an impact, those small programs do, in fact, have an impact. I think it's more an observation than a question to this group. And I think Dan wanted to make one additional comment in this vein.
It's against the rules to pass the mic yourself, but you can go ahead and do it. I just have lost control.
No, I just want to thank the panelists for the very helpful and thoughtful remarks that I think we need to mull over a bit longer. With respect to the federal role, if one looks at other sectors that are deemed important for U.S. economic and the overall health of our country, there's always been a federal role, let's say, in biomedical and science. There are certain things that really only the federal government can do, and I don't think any member of the population would resent, say, what's going on in genome research or the brain studies or in petrochemical, let's say. We're a really good buy for the government in that sense, that supportive language doesn't cost nearly so much as it does for our colleagues in computer science, let's say, or in the hard sciences. We can do a lot with extremely little money, and what is really needed is attention to those high leverage areas, such as research and some of the communications areas we heard today, where there are gaps that are clearly not yet closed and need to be. And I'm not expecting some state government or local school board to pick that up. That really is a federal responsibility, or it won't get done. The second area has to do with equity and access, and that has come up again and again in all our panels today. If we want to get to that triangle, that inverted pyramid, or the upright pyramid, we have to do something to catch up. And right now, our immersion situation, there's certain things that departments and school systems can do really well by reinventing themselves. There's certain other things like overseas immersion in a place like China or Africa that is a bit much to expect a small college dean or a family from Peoria to be able to do on their own. And so it seems to me you've got a couple of areas, research and intervention in areas like overseas immersion, without which we can't make it as well.
You know,
go ahead.
It's interesting. One of the comments I think that's interesting to engage more and think a bit more about it, and I'm sorry that I don't think anybody from AAU is here, as an example. Part of the problem that we have on the research side and the funding side and on the federal side is not hearing from the university community that this is a priority. And getting presidents of universities to come to Washington because it's not on their top 5. It's the Nanotech Center for, incidentally, from Department of Defense for $75 million. And it's not, so when I ask the question, how does the education sector organize itself to present a better case, part of the problem is getting colleges and universities to present an agenda to their members that include this issue as part of their portfolio. They don't do it because, particularly in this budget environment, it used to be you could talk about your top 5. I think you can only talk about your first. You're not pushing me away, are you?
Oh, yeah.
Your first.
Where's the hook?
And just to preempt
one thing.
Just to preempt Dick, Mike, you had a comment?
Yes. I'd like to remind folks that NCEP was established in '91, and I think Bob was there at the beginning. That organization was actually set up, the National Security Education Program, not to serve the Department of Defense, but rather the entire federal government that works in broadly defined national security positions. And therefore, the idea started of creating programs at universities and colleges for educated college graduates who then would work in government. That has now expanded to the Nestle program, where you have the State Department doing the same thing. It's not just for State Department. They are actually creating these folks, but for a broader constituency. And the same thing now with Star Talk, which is also a K-12 program with a broader idea. But again, the end goal is to create capabilities for a federal sector that desperately needs it. But these folks may go work elsewhere as well. So there is a recognition here. And, you know, Bob, you could talk about this for hours, but
I'm not allowed to.
Apparently you don't have any time to do it.
I would love to go on more on this conversation, but there's a guy pushing me out of the way. So thank you all. Thank to the panelists. Thank you all.
Thank you.
I'm going to stay right behind you.
Excellent. We have scheduled here just a wrap-up, and our wrap-up is going to be very brief. I'm going to ask the sponsors if any of the sponsors have any remarks to make because about follow-up, about anything they've heard that surprised them or anything else. And we're not taking a lot of time on this because the point of all of this has been to get input to write something now more effectively for a report and put recommendations in for action, that this is just not another wonderful exchange. I'm tired of them, as tired as you are of them as well. So I will ask if the sponsors, you can speak there or you can come up and take a chair. Oh, that's good. But you were not speaking long. You have to give a very pointed reaction to something you've heard or something you want to do. Okay? Yeah, come on. But we're not here because we have a reception, and the sponsors will meet with our British friends for dinner, because then we will take actions and reactions as well. So I leave it to all of you, anyone who wants to say something or anything. Marty?
I heard my colleague Manerat Sawasdiwat, who is here from Thailand. She's representing 13 countries through the Asian and Eurasian unification that are dealing with language issues. She thinks we need a strategic plan, which I think is a great idea. But what I heard basically today was talking about top-down initiatives and bottom-up initiatives to help at all levels bring this whole initiative together. And based on the recommendations in the report right now, I just want to say that ACTFL, along with the education community, and I mean broader than just the language community, is initiating a public awareness campaign next year, which will focus on parents and students and talk to them about not just advocating the importance of languages, but tying it to jobs and careers, which we heard today was so vital. So we're looking for all of you for support. Most of you here have already said you would be supportive, and we're very excited about this. We're engaging some very high-profile public personalities to talk about the importance of languages and to really hit at this whole idea of changing the way Americans perceive the importance of languages through the economic reasons, jobs, and careers.
And I'd like to follow up a couple of things that I heard very clearly from the panels today, as well as discussions with a good number of you. And I think it dovetails with what Marty's suggesting in terms of a strategic plan, and even what our government colleagues related. Organizing ourselves, in fact, to develop that plan and coordinate that plan needn't be terribly tight coordination, but we actually do need to organize ourselves to some degree. And then developing some really clear messages, some clear and compelling messages on one sheet of paper, basically, that tell a story that, and it's actually remarkable that even in this room we don't fully understand some of the key elements of what's going on in the language enterprise. So among this collective group, that then gets us the ability to go and make policy arguments, whether it's to local decision makers, where in the K-20 system, or whether it's at the national level, or whether it's with the corporate sector.
Boy, girl, Anandini. This is our guest from the British Academy, who's in charge of the Lost for Words Initiative, Anandini Yoganathan. Anandini.
Oh, just turn it on. Yeah.
This is technology.
There's a switch. There's a button to push that says on.
Okay, inside voices. I think the main thing is that this has been mildly comforting, but also very worrying that the challenges we share are the same as the challenges that you share. I would agree that the main task for the white paper and going forward is to really refine the messages, to map exactly what kind of actions we're trying to take and the recommendations that we make based on the target audiences, be it business sector or teachers or students. And I think that's the only way that we will be able to create real step change and make sure that we don't have the same conference next year saying the same things.
Yes. Okay.
You're the boy.
Can't turn it on, right? There it is. It's on.
How are we doing?
We had a conversation this morning that I think we need to return to, and it picks up on some of what Marty said about messaging just now. I think we need a longer conversation and strategy about who we're messaging and what we want them to hear. Because if it's the governor of a state, he needs one kind of messaging. If it's a state legislator, they need another kind of messaging. If it's parents, it's a whole different message. If it's kids, I mean, kindergartners don't make the decision, their parents do. Mm-hmm. But by the time a kid gets to middle school and says, I don't want to do this anymore, they need to be messaged. There are lots of this crowdsourcing. There are lots of ways to be much more sophisticated about the messaging, but it's got to be a more effective way to message the right audiences, to more effectively build a coalition of support. Particularly, David said it's really the state level is really so critical here. The federal government, as I maybe didn't say well enough, is really, as you all know, in the education sphere, really uncomfortable about setting policy. And when it has, like No Child Left Behind, things didn't go so well in some areas. So it's really the state level, and it's really messaging the states and getting the word out and getting the word out to the right constituency. And I think that's something that the white paper, as it comes up with a set of recommendations, can really help on fine-tuning that process a bit more.
Maybe we're coming back to you to wrap it up, but you go now.
Okay, I'll go fast. So Mike asked, so what do you want, community? Let's not have just another conference. So I think what I want is for the government to ask me hard questions in a formal way, building up perhaps to this language czar, but yeah, right, the one after we're shut down, after we're back from shutdown. But something like, a National Research Council report. Right after 9/11, it was extremely important for all of the work in terrorism, which was spread across multidisciplines, and nobody was talking to each other, and everybody was talking to their own agency. Ask me hard questions and make me efficient. I mean, you even saw in the panel that I was running, so we had Liz Albro, well, she does literacy, and you had Joan Mailing, and they do linguistics, and she didn't even talk to you about half of the stuff that the NSF funds that's relevant. Brain stuff to make people more, to individualize learning, and big data and computational linguistics so that we can do the content analysis to make the technology more than a platform, to make it a substitute. So if you ask us in the research community hard questions, we will come together and give you answers so that then you can move as one government as opposed to many organizations within the government, and we might be a little bit more efficient.
I want to return to the word Anglophone in the very beginning, because I think in particularly the higher education panel today, we saw that that is more than a positive epithet, and that it has some rather unfortunate post-colonial and legacy attached to it, as does some of the Eurocentrism that dominates our educational philosophy and the kind of distribution of language study in the United States today. And I won't go into the otherizing tendency of words like foreign languages, but there's a lot of sort of presentational issues here. They may look and sound superficial to many of us in the room who have been used to those terminologies, but they each have a kind of semantic history behind them, none of which is terribly attractive. And that, as far as messaging is concerned, we ought to probably begin by fixing and cleaning that part of it up. Even the College Board talks of world languages today. Surely we can match that. The other thing is we need to do a better job of drawing attention to some of the major studies that have come out. And I would mention, and Rosemary mentioned it this afternoon, but I would mention it again, that the shape of an undergraduate Lang Lit program today is that it is training approximately 96% of people who will not go on to graduate school in either language or lit, but will be doing something else, and yet the configuration of those departments still looks a lot like it was training primarily graduate students of decades before. That is changing. The flagship model shows that it doesn't have to look that way. Other institutions have done that, but I think the problem with our messaging is that the people we're talking to all went through the old system with corresponding results, and the result is that until you can persuade them that anything changed, they're still going to continue to make the assumptions about our language training pipeline that they always have, and in fact it's a different story. Finally, there's an issue here of accountability, and the accountability is vertical in a sense, accountability up and down the line in terms of the levels of proficiency and knowledge and skills that we can get from an entering freshman. Let's say whether that freshman is going into community college or going into a regular college, a four-year college. We're doing very, very badly right now in articulating the success. So if we talk about persistence, which is a big education issue, we kind of ought to look at just persistence of study among our own students. To what extent are we ourselves losing them? And then can we tie better rates of persistence to, say, more effective, larger persistence rates in colleges and high schools more generally? I'm always shocked when I read that the overall persistence rate in general, if you give people 6 years in an American higher education system, we're batting 59% right now. If you look at the community college, it's around 39. And these are numbers that are way below the countries in Europe that we like to compare ourselves with. So I think we're actually need to stop being part of the problem, and we can do that because we have things like the ILR, we have pre-K through 20 standards and pre-K through 16 standards. We can place our students along that continuum and communicate to one another, to future employers, to graduate deans, and to high school principals what we're doing and how somebody's moving along that. So we've got those calibrations. We're actually better off than historians, maybe even than mathematicians in that respect, but we don't refer to it.
We have one more sponsor. Hans, I left that chair for you, and that's not Elijah's chair. That was yours. Do you want to add one note? Or have you said? I don't have a mic.
I debated whether I should sort of bring this up, but trying to sort of pull all this together and looking at it from an industrial perspective, it seems to me that we are missing leadership. We are missing a strategy or a strategic plan, but I don't think we should spend our time sort of artificially creating those things. I think the leadership has to come from a very high place, and I think that's a role the government should play, the federal government should play. And I was trying to think of an analogy, and it occurs to me: can we have something like the federal highway program, but for language? Because what we're talking about is an infrastructure that's necessary to underlie everything that goes on, everything in industry, everything in commerce, everything in the government itself. We need something that's very large, very robust, that involves technology, it involves people, it involves all sorts of other aspects that we deal with all the time, defense, security, and so forth. But we don't want the government, I think, creating the business end of things. We want the government to create this platform, this infrastructure on which business can then innovate and build. And so it seems to me we're at an urgent point in the history of this whole topic, in the history of the world, where we need something like that. We need a massive sort of infrastructure that only something like a government can actually produce or help produce, that can then underlay everything that can be on top of that. So I would suggest the government needs to step up and lead that effort, and I don't know where that goes, how far up that goes, and it can then bring in business, research, education, and all the various aspects we've been talking about to actually put those heads together and create that infrastructure. So,
thank you, sir. Got it. We could go on and on and on, because everyone here, and what's amazing to me, the room is filled with experts. How quiet you've been, and you haven't thrown chairs yet. I would have been bursting at the seams at listening to all this and not having a chance to react. I will promise you, short of modals, that we will convene the language enterprise. What this is the convention of the language enterprise, with academe, with government, with business, with heritage communities, and overseas. We will do that. And every one of these sponsors is responsible to hold us to it and participate and provide the resources that are necessary, by the way. And we need more partners. Everyone in this room who wants to join these sponsors and be, as you are, a member of the language enterprise, you are welcome. Just get one of us and say, put my name down, I'm in. The second part of it is we will move forward on our international collaboration. We have been asked by the British Academy to convene, to look at a memorandum of understanding that will unify in some collaborative effort the academies of the United States, Australia, Social Science and Humanities, and the British Academy, to look for common solutions and maybe some kind of collective dialogue to address those common problems, okay? So I promise you those two things. I ask you for feedback. You have tweet, Twitter, get trodden, and whatever is necessary. We ask you to join us and give us feedback. If you don't like what you've read, come on in and do something about it, because we will write a report that goes forward and we will take action that will go forward. And we want partners and we want feedback. And I'm going to turn now to Amy for a final wrap-up. We will then...
This is like, come on, the final, the new. So I just want to say two things. First of all, I want to challenge you. You've heard a lot of great and very stimulating ideas, but ideas are not going to be enough. I don't know how many of you were reading the papers and not just concentrating on will your office be open tomorrow, but for those of you who were not, there was a major study by the UN that concluded that 97% of the leading climate scientists now agree that humans are responsible for climate change, and it's getting worse. And lots of good evidence for, those conclusions. But then if you looked at the very last page of the Times, they reported on a global survey of people, citizens like you and me all over the world can just write to the UN. There's a survey that you can take. What is your top priority? What is the problem that you really want to solve? And guess where climate change was on the list? It was dead last. It was absolutely dead last. So we need to be buoyed by good arguments, but we also need to be dedicated, and that's why my sponsors and I joined together, that it's not just all about being smart. It's not just about having the right arguments. It's about working with seasoned policymakers. It's about working with people who care. It's about bringing the best research to the political forefront so that we can make change. So you are now part of the language army. And as soon as the government reopens, we will be calling every single one of you at your offices, so please sign up. The last thing that I want to do, which is really a pleasure, is to thank the people who made this conference possible. So first of all, I want to thank my co-sponsors, who I'm not going to introduce individually, but I'll just remind you of their organizations. So we have Marty from ACTFL, and Bob Slater and Dan Davidson from American Councils, and Bill from JNCL, and Anandini from the British Academy. And we're going to finish with the front of the stage, and then we'll go to the behind the scenes, but really in front of the stage and always in front of really all public opinion except his own, is Richard Brecht, who championed this idea, who said, look, it's time to stop with the rice bowl mentality. It's time to take a different look. This conference was really his baby, and I want to thank him very, very much. And you can give me that look because you've given it to me for years. Okay. Okay. But, there are people who go behind the curtain and they really make these conferences run, and I want to thank them. I want to thank Kiva Blair. Kiva, are you here? She's probably running around. Where? There you go. If you liked the Twitter board, if you liked anything about the technology, it was not Dick Brecht, I guarantee you. It was Kiva. I want to thank American Councils. Sergei Shauchinka, who... there you go. Thank you, Sergey. And Patrick Hale was running the... There he is behind... Thank you, Patrick. Grant Brown, that's an easier name also. Thank you very much. And most of all, I want to thank Pam Morse and Elsbeth Clay, who did all of the planning for this event and dealt with this sort of motley crew of organizers. So thank you very much. Okay, But now the moment that you've all been waiting for, I want to ask Nigel to come up. I want to thank the British Academy. But Nigel is actually going to invite you for drinks, so you really want to hear that.
Yes, I'm not going to add anything to it except to say thank you to everybody again, and particularly thanks to Dick and to Amy. But there does come a point in any day where it's very hard to continue talking if you don't have a glass in your hand. And I think we've hit that point. So I would like to invite you on behalf of the British Academy to move to where the refreshments are. Thank you.